Hello everybody! Oh, I'm excited. Today, this video is an epic compilation of all the gut feeling stories, all the good ones from Reddit. Most videos you've watched like this only go into one thread, but I have used the power of technology to combine 5 gut feeling videos. And not only did I combine them, but I took out all of the boring, one-word, one-sentence responses that don't give you any butt-clenching, gut-feeling action. And we're gonna get into it. So, without further ado, I'm not gonna comment, I'm just gonna do what I can to read these in an epic way. Let's get at it. The first story. I was 18. And I had just moved into my own apartment. The complex was managed by the owner's son, and right from the get-go, he seemed off to get me. He seemed off. Nothing that I could articulate, but I felt uncomfortable around him. Since he was frequently at the complex for one reason or another, I kept my door locked and chained whenever I was home, and I would literally run away if I saw him outside to avoid talking to him. Well, one day I grabbed the local paper, and on the front page is this guy's face. He had fallen in love with a previous tenant and had harassed her and her boyfriend and continued to stalk her after she moved away. She was a grade school teacher, and he waited outside the school for her, shot and killed her in front of the school kids, and then he killed himself. Whew. I found an article about this. I misremembered some of the details. He did harass a woman who lived at the apartment complex and attacked her boyfriend, but the woman he killed was someone he knew from college, a different person. And he died because of a shootout with the police, not from suicide. Funny how our memory alters things, isn't it? So creepy how sometimes you can't just explain it. You know. The guy at our small town post office, he just always seemed a little off to me. He gave me the creeps. My sister always felt the same way. My mom, on the other hand, always thought he seemed nice. Fast forward a few years, and the guy is arrested and charged with incest. I never got the whole story. I think they wanted it hush-hush because it was a small town and he was a government employee. But I think I heard it was his daughter or stepdaughter he was fooling with, and from what I read, it was not consensual. The oldest individual was only 14. Here's a story from Nova Baby. I was at a party once at an apartment complex that's known for its sketchy tenants. I only knew a few people there, so I just stuck with one of my friends. Halfway through the party, a girl, I'll call her Sally, I met a few months back at a job, showed up with 2 guys who just seemed really shady, pushing drugs, feeding this girl tons of whiskey, even though she was underage. No one really knew who invited them. And by 11 p.m., Sally was fucked up. My friend and I leave to go get beer and come back an hour later. Sally is on the floor in the back room, convulsing and foaming at the mouth. Her friends she showed up with refused to allow me to take her to the bath and make her throw up. Chaos ensues. I leave. While walking back to my friend's apartment, I call 911 because I knew that something was seriously wrong with her. The EMTs show up and took her to the hospital. 2 days later, she messages me on Facebook to tell me the doctors found multiple drugs in her system that she did not choose to take. She suspects it was her friends, but she isn't sure. I'm positive that it was them. 6 months later, a news article is posted. One of the sketchy guys was arrested for running a child trafficking business from a nearby hotel. So basically, the second I saw those dudes show up, my acquaintance as Sally, I knew something was fishy. And I was right. Those guys were some shitty people. She didn't come to the party with me. In fact, it was kind of a weird coincidence that she was there and we had a mini reunion. She was underage to drink, but legally an adult, so what was I gonna do? She appeared to be having a good time, and I assumed she knew the people she came with. I left her alone because I didn't actually know for a fact they were shitty people. I left again when she was vomiting because there were at least 5 people trying to get me out of the room, shutting the door in my face, threatening me, etc. So yeah, I left and I called the police. The EMTs came in 5 minutes. This story is by Theo King. My mother, around 9 or 10 years old, I was around 9 or 10 years old at the time, was eating dinner with her family. Oh no, the mother was 9 or 10 years old. Was eating dinner with her family and someone knocked at the front door. Her dad, my grandfather, got up to answer and it was a salesman. My grandfather politely declined whatever product he was selling and whatever spiel he was going to go on as they were having family dinner. The salesman was very aggressive in trying to continue speaking and even tried to invite himself inside their home. At that point, my usually level-headed grandfather gets upset and says something along the lines of, "You need to leave. Now." Finally, the salesman gives up and proceeds to the next house, but not before my grandfather called the neighbors to warn them. The young female neighbor answered the phone and said she was home alone, so my grandfather told her not to answer the door whatsoever. Fast forward a few months, and the salesman turns out to be a serial killer, targeting young women home by themselves and posing as a salesman. To sum it all up, my grandfather may have very well saved his neighbor's life. Always reminds me to trust my gut when I get a bad feeling. Lady Scarlet 90 has a story to share. This reminds me of a story my grandma tells about a pushy traveling salesman. My mom and uncle were little at the time, and I think they were home with her. She answered the door, and this guy was very insistent on coming in. She refused multiple times. When she went to shut the door, he put his foot in the doorway to stop her. Suddenly, Grandma's big dog, who wasn't allowed to come across the house on the carpet, was by her side. Grandma always describes Reb as a possible wolf or a coyote, having yellow eyes and a wild look about him. The kind of dog that did not allow people to mess with his family. The salesman took one look at this large, yellow-eyed, bristling and growling at him and said, "I think I better go." To which Grandma replied, "I think you better. Listen to your dogs too, guys." Yeah, dogs have gut feelings. Dogs have great gut feelings. Next story is by Votum Separatum. Creepy. I have an IL. I think they mean IRL. I have an IL serial killer story too, which I've posted before, and it goes something like this. In the mid-90s, I was in middle school and roaming the neighborhood with 4 or 5 of my friends, who were all female, one summer night. We were walking past this apartment complex, and all of a sudden, this dude emerged from behind a hedge and gave us this story about how he and his buddies paid these girls they were drinking with $20 to jump in the apartment complex pool and said he'd give us $20 if we did it too. My friend, who was walking in front, started to engage with him, and he was encouraged and started urging her to follow him into the bushes, and he'd show her where the pool was. I immediately got strong creep vibes and grabbed my friend's arm and pulled her away, and we all broke into a run and got them out of there. Bonus revelation? A few months ago, I was watching a documentary about the serial killer, Paul Runge, who lived in my town and was actively killing women at the time of this incident with my friends. After watching a video of him and hearing his voice, I am convinced this was who we had encountered that night. Second bonus revelation. I delivered newspapers to the neighborhood where Paul Runge and his likely complicit girlfriend lived, and where he bludgeoned and dismembered one of his first victims while he lived there. Whew. There were these 3 people that I bowled with in a league. They were on a different team, but we played against them quite often. It was a girl, her husband of 10 years, and her best friend, who is also a female. The first time I met them, I said to my teammates that something shifty was going on with the husband and the friend. I said for an entire year that there was something going on between them. Everybody laughed and said I was wrong. About a year and a half later, after we first met them, the husband left the wife for the best friend. Called it. Nightmare Phantom says, there's a guy in my office who is really nice, good dude, and has the mixture of confidence and good looks. On my second day, I told my buddy who was working there that I was picking up on vibes between him and the girl who was training me. He asked why, and I said, just a gut feeling. They ended up dating 4 months later. After they broke up, I told my buddy several different times I was feeling that same vibe between him and several other girls at different times over the course of maybe 3 months. Again, he said that's crazy. Some of them have boyfriends. I went out drinking with the guy like a week ago, and he tells me that he's been getting his way through the office because he's still upset about the breakup with the first girl. I asked who, and he guessed, and I had guessed every single one of them correctly. I completely know what you mean. The way someone talks about someone, the inflection in their voice, the mannerisms they display, you can just tell when someone likes someone or they're fucking. I had a similar experience, only it was my mom. Seriously hoped I was wrong, but turned out I wasn't. Nothing has been the same. Oh, I'm sorry, Deadly Waffle. And there we go, we finished the first thread. This is an old one from 7 years ago. Look at that. Boom, done with that one. On to the next thread. This was originally by Can't Be Bothered, TK. And the first story from this thread is by Nothing First Create. There's been a few times where I hadn't listened to my gut, but one sticks out where I did. I used to live in a smaller Minnesotan town, down near some train tracks and a bike running path that extends out of town into the woods. One evening, I'm sitting outside on my porch drinking a couple of beers with my buddy. Two dudes woke up on us kind of out of nowhere, and immediately something was just off with them. It's a college town and drunk people come up onto your porch a lot, or randomly just say hello on their way to or from the bars, but these dudes had a badass vibe to them. I had a little black Louisville Slugger lying next to me on the porch, so I grabbed it and just held it across my lap. One dude asks us, "You guys got an extra smoke?" Buddy says, "Nope." The other guy comes up real close, almost onto the porch, and says, "Did you see my face?" I just kept looking forward, but not directly at him, and just said, "Nah, man, we didn't see anything." He said something like, "Good, little punk ass," and they both walked away. 2 nights later, I'm sitting in my living room with the same buddy, and the local news is on. 2 guys arrested for robbing and stabbing a man a couple nights back on the trail down by the tracks next to where I live. My buddy had looked at their faces coming up, and I had seen the dude clear as day that had asked for the smoke. It was those same fucking guys. Next story is by The Big Squeak. I woke up at 3 a.m. once, sitting upright in bed. I felt on alert and my heart raced when I saw that my cat was on alert too, wide awake by my feet with his ears perked up. But I didn't see or hear anything weird. Something didn't feel right and I couldn't relax, so I got up and I went to the kitchen. Turned on some food, turned on the lights and ate some food, even though I wasn't hungry. Eventually, I went back to bed. We discovered the next morning that somebody had stopped while in the process of using some kind of tool to cut a big hole in the glass window in the living room. They were trying to break in, right next to the bedroom. I think the lights I turned on scared them away. Edited to add that we had 3 long years of issues with our neighbors. They repeatedly came into our property and were pissed that we put a 9-foot fence to keep them out. This attempted break-in happened right after the fence went up, and 2 days before they all moved out. Glad those pieces are long gone. Amtom032 shares a story. At age 5, I was almost abducted by strangers at the park who had a bunch of toys on a blanket and tried to lure me into their motorhome. I looked back to my dad, who was talking to his friend maybe 100 yards away, and I got a tummy ache when one of them tried to coax me by reaching for my arm to lead me away, and I screamed and ran like hell back to my dad. Years later, I found out those same people had abducted other children who weren't so lucky. I never ignored a gut feeling since then. Thanks for all the positive feedback. And for your info, trust me, once my dad got over the shock, he let me have it for not only wandering off, but for speaking to complete strangers. I talked to my mom a bit about it today, and she told me my dad broke down and blamed himself. Positive outlook on this, though. Guys, this is just one instance, scary as it may be, where my gut led me in the right direction, and my instinct for danger is now uncanny. I truly believe everything happens for a reason. I trusted my instincts, and it kept me safe, and it still does. Next story is by Raining Cat Snuff. Same. When I was 10, people tried to kidnap me. I was outside my house playing. This couple I'd never seen before pulled up and rolled down the window. Woman in the driver's seat, man in the passenger. They told me they'd lost a puppy, and had I seen the puppy? Or their 2 kids who were looking for the puppy? The street was dead quiet, and I had never seen them before. No one but me was out. I stayed several feet away, feeling uncomfortable. My mom taught me not to trust strangers like this. Then they asked me if I would get in the car with them to help them look. They promised me I would get to play with the puppy and their sons if I did. That's when I really got that off feeling, like there were no sons or no puppies. And I told them no, and I went inside. I knew they were trying to lure me in. As an adult, I realized that the scope of what could have happened, and that, with the window down, the man could have pulled me in since no one was around, and it might have gone unnoticed. D3KU03 also had something like that. Living in a rural village area, when I was 7 to 8, I was walking home from school when it was raining, super hard and freezing cold. A black car with one middle-aged man pulled up next to me and asked if I needed a lift, and I got inside. Almost immediately, I was starting to feel very sick and clutched the door as far away from him as possible to jump out instantly. Nothing happened though, and he dropped me off at home about 5 minutes later. I still can remember everything from that day, except the guy's face. I don't know if he never planned anything anyways, or if my own visible panic deterred him. Pendulous Testicles has a story to share. Biker here. Us two-wheeled vehicle users, reading drivers' intentions long before they do it is very much a real thing many of us seem to develop. We're very much more highly alert than the average car driver, as accidents for us have far more catastrophic consequences. I would say that because I'm more alert as a road user than I was as just a car user, I can now predict where a car is going to go before its driver has signaled their intent about 9 times out of 10, purely down to the way they're driving. For example, if a car is intending to make a turn at a coming junction, most car drivers will unconsciously move a little over in their lane toward the direction of their intended turn, a good 10 to 20 seconds before they even signal, purely because they're thinking about it. You'll also notice that their head often leans or looks over to the same direction of their turn, a long time before the signal, for the same reasons. There's lots of little things like this which all add up to a body language of intention, which is often readable before the driver even signals their intent. Orgy of Nerdiness says, I have to admit, I kind of enjoy the times a driver does something thoughtless and dangerous and doesn't see me until the very last second, and I see the look of, oh shit, I almost just killed someone, on their face. But the reality is that I saw them at least 10 seconds prior, anticipated that they might do the stupid thing, and was already covering my brake, changing lane positions, and had thought my best reaction if they were to do the stupid thing. I hope it scares them enough to be more comfortable next time, because they very well could have killed somebody. I will say, everybody misses and makes mistakes. I understand that even good drivers will miss bikers sometimes. But drivers, I can forgive a lot of stupid shit, as long as you use your turn signal before you do the stupid shit. Your turn signal should be a deeply ingrained habit, not something you think to do when there are other cars around. It's the times when you don't see us that your turn signal is the most important. It helps me keep you from killing me when you're not paying enough attention to what you're doing or what's around you. Vahranga shares a story about gut feelings. Once I saw a box sitting in the road as I walked past. I felt a bit weird and noticed the box was not moving when the cars drove past it. So I ran out into the road, when it was all clear of course, to get the box off the road. The box was full of nails. If anybody had driven over it, they would have been everywhere. Somebody had stolen it from a nearby construction site and put it in the road. I called the police and they came to get it and replaced it at the construction site. Well, that guy saved a bunch of cars, huh? This next story is by the Purple Zone. Well, I was walking home. It wasn't late, and I'm from a pretty safe area, but it was the time of year when it starts to get dark really early, so it did feel kind of ominous. Anyway, I passed this guy in a red sweater and a red tracksuit bottom, and he looks at me funny. Maybe he's high? Maybe he's drunk? Either way, something is not quite right about him. I keep going. Look behind me. He is still there. I cross the road. He crosses with me. As soon as I turn a corner, I sprint to my compartment complex and run into the coded gate and I wait. He rocks up a minute later and stares at me through the gate. He just stares at me for a good 10 or 20 seconds and then runs back the way he came. Whew. One time, I was walking home at about 1 a.m. and there was a little dark half road, half parking lot next to a high school that I would walk through to get home to my apartment block. Well, this night, there was a guy sort of standing around on the sidewalk, and as I approached, he was staring at me with far more interest than was appropriate under the circumstances, clearly hoping I would choose the parking lot route. I decided that today I would take the long, well-lit, populated way home. When I got close to my apartment block, there was the guy again, standing at the entrance to the half road where it met my street, giving me the evil eye. I stepped lively and got inside fast in case he decided to chance his luck. Whew, these give me the shivers. Next story by Ian Pampelmoose. I was once driving home with the tram and some guy who was wearing a hoodie, but he was definitely around 40 or 50. This guy was constantly staring at me. I tried to not give him any attention because in Berlin, there's tons of strange people. But this guy started to change trains together with me and kept being near me. At one point, I just kept standing near the doors at one station. I jumped out right before the doors closed, so he wasn't prepared because he was sitting somewhere. It was winter and already pretty dark. I really didn't have a good feeling. Yeah, I mean, situations like that, you gotta listen to your gut. You're more likely to get I mean, what's bad's gonna happen by you jumping off the train last second? Unless you actually get hurt by it, you know? I always think it's better to listen. You know, if it makes you do something and it's like, well, I'm gonna just randomly do the more time-consuming thing. Worst case scenario, you took a longer walk, you know? I mean, is that really that bad? Ooh, an epic story by Axlorg8. I had a similar experience 2 months ago. Times had changed, and I had a late-night class that got out at 8 p.m. By that time, it was really dark, but luckily, my apartment was a street away from my campus. I had to walk a long sidewalk to get to the building's doors that were locked, unless you had an electric key, which I did. I was on the long strip of sidewalk, and on the other side of the street were some small restaurants. But it was dark and eerie, so nobody aside from 2 people was around. As I'm walking, I notice a woman in a gray hoodie with her hood up, which is weird considering it wasn't cold that night, and she stayed still the whole time that I noticed her. She wasn't doing anything except standing a little off of the sidewalk, but it still got my gut feeling. We make eye contact because she was in my line of direction. She smiles. I smile, and then I pass her. All of a sudden, she starts walking behind me. I'm suspicious now, especially since it wasn't that long that a guy got stabbed on the same property. I notice a man walking the opposite direction, which calms me a little bit. A witness, you know? But the moment he would pass us, there would literally be nobody around, or facing in our general direction, so it doesn't last long. I crossed the road, and she went a few feet ahead of me, for she also crossed the road. She was now ahead of me, and my apartment store was right there. The moment she just stopped randomly, I booked it across the street and got inside with the electronic key. The door leads to an indoor stairwell, and I go up some to get to my apartment. There's windows showing the same road I take, and the lady is gone. I don't know if she was actually planning on something, or if I was neurotic, but I was not going to take any chances. Next story is by Diesmod. I am a firefighter. We got called out to a tree fire started by a fallen power line. We pull up in the truck, and I'm trusting that my driver and crew leader are doing their job and have good situational awareness. We get out of the truck, and we park next to a set of power lines that haven't fallen. It's a very windy night, and I can see the power lines swinging, so I voice my concerns to my crew leader, who says that it's going to be fine. We get the hose out, risk of tree catching fire onto a house outweighing potential risk of arcing, plus the line disconnected when it fell. And I'm on the branch ready to start putting it out with 2 others near me when I get a chill. I look up to see the line swinging violently, and I yell, "Everyone, can move!" As the 3 of us sprint and dive out of the way, we hear a thwip and crack, and sure enough, the line we were under came loose and stayed connected to the power pole. If I hadn't gotten that chill, chances are we would have had 3 fried firemen. Next story is by My Name's Jeff. I had a friend who said we should go to this party he was invited to by a classmate of his. We ended driving out to it, and we noticed the neighborhood was not too pleasant and sketchy. We saw that the house had some lights on it in the backyard, but it was kind of quiet for a party. I decided that we should not go since something felt really off. My friend ended up finding the classmate that invited him got robbed and threatened when he went to the party. It ended up being a fake party. Next story is by Manic Typist, an epic story. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. It's one of many, but this one stands out. I'm about 7. My neighbors, 8 and 9, and we're at a bus stop. A guy in a stereotypical white van pulls up and asks me if we've seen a dog. He doesn't describe the dog, and the truth is, dogs run around all the time in our neighborhood. My mother taught me, stranger danger, since as long as I can remember. So one of the boys at the stop, we'll call him Paul. Paul describes a dog, and a man in a van is like, "That's my dog. Why don't you go get inside the van and we can go look for him?" Well, I had red flags going on, all off at this point, and I said, "No, I have to ask my mom." And as soon as those words left my mouth, he peeled out. It was only later that I realized I saved us all from child abduction, specifically Paul, who was walking towards the van to get in. Teach your kids what to do if this situation happens. Get the license plate, the guy's face, the car type, and what to do if something does happen. If I had known to snag his plates, we might have had a chance at catching him. But I only knew to say no. Another time I was speeding down a hill and I thought, what if there's a deer around the corner? So I slowed down and sure enough, there were 3 deer in the road. Saved my own life by a rando thought. Trust your gut feelings. This was unrelated, but one time when I was a bit younger and more of a gup, I drank 2 Four Locos and took 2 Xanax bars. What? So, just so you know, a bar of Xanax is like a strong dose. So 2 Xannies with any alcohol is enough to cause somebody to black out and do things, but have no recollection of it. Like, I know people who've done that and they've driven somewhere and they have no memory of it. They've gone out to get food and come back and had a conversation and then been asked about it the next day and had absolutely no memory. Mixing Xanax with alcohol, yeah, you don't black out like you just pass out. You literally lose your memory. I'm going to restart that just so you have some context about what this person's doing. Unrelated, but one time when I was a bit younger and more of a gup, I drank 2 Four Locos and took 2 Xanax bars, immediately blacked out. I know that combo is super dangerous. I was kind of suicidal at the time. So I woke up the next day, surprised to be in my bed. My roommate said I came home at 3 a.m, soaking wet, like I jumped in the lake that was nearby, that was full of alligators. But my phone had no issues or anything. Sometimes I wonder if I just got insanely lucky or if I died in that timeline. I don't do stupid like that anymore. Whew. Yeah, he probably just like ran through a sprinkler or like poured water all over his face or something. People do kind of weird stuff when they're like that. Hopefully he didn't swim in the lake. Oh, that's fucking scary. Zerethian has a story to share. One time, I was walking home, and there is a part where the road where it whips back and forth, and it's very narrow and bordered by large trees. Most sensible people don't go that way, or they think they're lost going through it, or they go really slowly. Most others can whip through it because they don't know what is ahead. So I saw 3 deer. 2 were very young, around here. Deer come and go along the streets constantly, so it's not a big surprise. Well, I'm assuming mother sniffed around and started to cross the street after I passed. A second later, the other 2 start to cross and I look away. 2 seconds later, I'm minding my own business and I hear scream. I look back and see one of the deer hit solidly and is lying on half the ground on the hood. The lucky bastard hops up and dances it off in a couple steps and runs away. I didn't think the car was damaged that much either. And Aviary Forever shares the story. This just reminded me of a similar gut feeling story. I think I was in first grade, so 6, 7? I was set to walk 2 blocks to my friend's house after school to have a snack and watch VeggieTales or something like that, when a lady in an older SUV pulled up to the curb by the school. She rolled down her window and told me that my mom had sent her to pick us up, which I remember thinking was weird since we had plans to go to my friend's house. My friend looked at me and then started towards the car when I blurted out something like, "Wait, I think we're supposed to go to her house." I can't remember what her exact reaction was, But I remember her kind of getting flustered and saying it was an emergency. But I just had that weird gut feeling that something wasn't right, so I refused to get into the car. She eventually drove off. Funny thing was, we had just had an assembly on stranger danger. So I think that's probably a big part of the reason that I listened to my gut. After she left, we went back towards the school and I told my teacher about it. The look on her face was absolute horror. I remember a lot of commotion and our moms being cold and trying to describe what happened over and over. As far as I know, nothing ever came of it, but I also didn't think to check. Roly-poly guacamole says, I was driving home the other week, and I was about a half mile from the turn onto the road to my house, from a main 40-mile-per-hour road. I wish they would lower the limit on that road. I usually make fast turns because I despise being behind slow turners on roads like that. The half mile down, though, I was hit so hard with a random and very clear thought of, I should take turns a bit slower and be more careful. There was no reason at all for me to have randomly thought this. There was no warning, no external trigger, as far as I know, that made the thought disappear. Or appear. Anyway, I took the turn to my house slower than usual, and this kid on a skateboard was skating right at me. If I had gone my normal speed, I have no doubt I would have hit him. The sidewalk was on the other side, and he shouldn't have been there, which makes it even more bizarre to me that I thought this thing right before it happened. They say our senses can pick up on things that we can't. Brain activity versus ability to focus and all that amazing neurological stuff. But this was just, how could I have possibly known? I couldn't have. There was no way at all my brain could have picked up on anything my consciousness couldn't focus on at that time. I was so far down the road that there were no external clues whatsoever. This one really stood out to me because of that. Quick side note, people don't really seem to understand how the brain works because, you're going towards an area that you've driven before that you know is a dangerous turn, whether you say it is or not. Like, your brain understands it's an area that is different than the rest of it, and you have a thought to go slower. You didn't think to go slower because you knew there was a skater there. You thought to go slower because your brain knew that was a dangerous area ahead of you. That's not random. That totally makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. Next story is by I Am Hoots. I was in the mountains driving along the interstate at night, heading home. The moon wasn't out yet, and in the darkness I sort of see something up ahead. Suddenly, to my right, on the side of the interstate, at the edge of all my headlights, I see elk. Lots of elk. Then to my left, I see more elk in the median of the interstate. I realize I just drove through a herd of elk at 70 miles per hour. Any one of those elk standing in the road could have totaled my car. I got the adrenaline shakes right after that, but they were gone behind me. It happened so fast. All right, look at that. We finished one more thread. Moving on to the next thread. This one's by Singer Roar. And the story is by Telegraph Kiss. I worked at a hospital, PRN, and frequently picked up extra shifts. I worked overnights and had asked the supervisor to go ahead and put me down to work the next night. Well, as the night went on, I just felt fucking awful. Completely doomed. I had never wanted so badly to be at home, and I lived an hour away from my job. So by the morning, I called the supervisor and asked her to remove me from the schedule. I went home feeling unexplainably scared. By the time I woke up, I was getting calls that an EF5 tornado had hit the town I worked in and wrecked the hospital I worked at. She was only 54 years old, and I was a CNA on the oncology unit. I was 23 and 5 months pregnant. My mom had a rare blood disorder. She ran almost every morning and had a pretty healthy lifestyle. She inspired me to be more active. I've had a great deal of my family die due to morbid obesity. 2 weeks after she passed away, my dad drove over to us to bring some of the food people have made, and in the trunk of her car, I found a pink blanket and some little pink stuffed animals. 3 days later, we found out that I was having a girl, one of the most beautiful, bittersweet moments of my life. My daughter, who is named after my mom, still sleeps with that blanket. I know, it still makes me tear up, and my daughter turns 5 in January. My dad has just never been the same. That's the hardest part. We used to fight, and hell, I don't know. We were just so stubborn, and he was very strict and cold when I was a child. He's changed completely. It's like once she was gone, he realized how much she loved him with all of his faults. We're much closer now. I couldn't allow myself to grieve for a long time. I had to think of my baby. Yet my husband had to remind me to eat. But watching my dad go through that crushing grief, I just felt so much for him. He's remarried now, but no one can be her. He goes to the cemetery every week. I don't know why I'm pouring all of this out. I guess I just miss my mom, and I appreciate those around me so much more now. Life is short. Ironic how we have to lose things to appreciate them, isn't it? Ghosts of Dogma adds, hey, I know this is an old thread and everything, but some interesting trivia. I'm not sure about tornadoes, but volcanoes and earthquakes apparently emit something called infrasound, which is sound of a particular and extremely low frequency. While it cannot be heard, at least not by humans, it creates inexplicable feelings of dread and terror in humans. The same phenomenon can also resonate with the human eyeball, creating tiny vibrations that make shadowy shapes appear on the edges of one's vision. Many believe this phenomena is the cause of ghost sightings, and some haunted places have been found to harbor pipes and air vents that happen to vibrate at the same frequency. Town in a Strange Land has a story to share. By the time that I was 13, my mother had been battling cancer for a year and a half. It was a few days after my birthday, and she was due for an IV port surgery the following morning. Just a simple day surgery, right? She came to my room to say goodnight, and I freaked out. For some reason, I knew this surgery would not go well. This is after she had had lung surgery and multiple bouts of chemo and radiation on her chest and her brain. She reassured me that it was fine and that we would go bowling a few days later. She never returned home. During the surgery, her remaining full lung collapsed, and it went entirely downhill from there. Just over a month later, she passed away. I have no idea what caused my fear of that being the end, but unfortunately, I was right. The next story is by Blind Rapture. When I was in my late teens, I was hanging out with a friend in my room. Suddenly, I started feeling panicky, with something telling me to leave the house. I decided to listen to my gut and told my friend we had to go to the store right now. Went outside to find my dad passed out in his truck, looking really sick and pale. Me and my friend pulled him out of the truck and called 911, while I performed CPR on my dad and saved his life. Later found out he'd overdosed on drugs, and he had choked on his own vomit. Who knows what would have happened if I didn't have the overwhelming urge to walk to the store for no reason. Wow, that's deep. I just want to point out that this person saved their dad's life because their dad was overdosed on drugs, and they didn't say anything shitty about the fact that their dad had a drug addiction. They just said that they're glad that they were able to. That's some genuine human interaction right there. Damn, this is making me tear up more than anything I've read so far. That's really, I love it when people appreciate what they have. I love it when people love someone before they die and appreciate people, you know? And this seems like a person who's appreciative of the life they have. He adds, unfortunately, it wasn't. We had a few years where things were going well, but then the company he owned went bankrupt, and things got a lot worse after that. My dad had a lot of demons, but he is in a better place now. He died 2 months ago from lung cancer, and thankfully it wasn't a long battle. That was the last thing he wanted. Oh. Toki says, similar. I kept thinking of the Spanish word abuela, or something like that, for over a week straight. It would just pop into my head. No idea what it meant. I asked my Spanish-speaking friend if she knew. She said that it meant grandmother. We checked on my grandmother, and she was in really bad shape. 2 weeks later, she died, essentially from heartbreak, because my grandfather had died a month earlier, and she'd stopped eating and depression. Right after I had my daughter, I got in the habit of turning my volume off so unexpected calls wouldn't wake my baby. One night, I decided to keep my ringer on, just in case my mom decided to call. Well, my stepdad did at about midnight, and it was to tell me that my brother was dead. I never turn off my ringer now, except at work. I'm sorry to hear about your loss. I recently lost my mother as well. She was 58. I remember on the day she suffered the stroke, because before I knew anything about her condition, I was inexplicably angry, and I kept saying, I wish today was yesterday. All right, next thread. This thread is by Bagels and Kegels. Bagels and Kegels. Great username. Ooh, an epic story by Lucille Bluth, 15. I volunteered as an EMT in a small village just outside New York City as a senior in high school for my first few years of college. This night we were on call for not only our town, but also the surrounding 2 villages who were out of service. One of the villages isn't exactly the best neighborhood. No. Generally, we always have a police officer on every scene we go to, just because they can always get there faster. This time around, though, in this bordering village, there was a fire on the other side of town and some sort of crime investigation elsewhere. Basically, the police department resources were stretched thin. A call came in from a 25-year-old male with a facial wound at a private residence with instructions that the patient was in the backyard. We were dispatched and told that there was no police department available and no advanced life support available. It was just me and my driver. Note that this is standard in most agencies. It just felt very unnerving for me. So we get on scene, and it was an apartment building with an open yard in the back that we could drive onto. My driver pulls onto the field, and he sees the patient sitting in the shadows, as though he was hiding. Something felt off, and that feeling prompted me to hit the floodlights on the ambulance, illuminating most of the yard. The moment the lights came on, we saw 5 to 7 men with tire irons and baseball bats, standing it was once pitched blackness. My driver hit it in reverse, and we got the hell out of there. I got on the radio and called for immediate assistance. It turns out those guys were planning on jumping us, stealing the narcotics from the ambulance, and taking the rig for a joyride. It was poor planning, really, because we don't carry narcotics on a basic life support ambulance. To this day, I fear what would have happened if we had just walked up to the patient. Oh, just for reference, that's totally real. Organized criminals absolutely attack paramedic stations because they do have narcotics. I know that because one of my friends is a paramedic, and his boss was there. So basically, what happened is the criminals, there was a team of like three of them, and they cased the place. So they knew the schedule, and they picked a time that was at night where the least amount of people were at the place. So it was like only one individual there because like one was sick or something like that, and there was always supposed to be 2. And so they like pistol whipped the guy and actually knocked him out, like you see in movies and stuff. Like, they did that. The problem is that in movies, people just get up from that like it's normal. But if you lose consciousness from being hit in the head that hard, you are just as likely to have brain damage as not. It's a serious problem if you got knocked out that way. Somebody who does that to you can actually be charged with intent to kill. Because if you hit someone hard enough to knock them out, you basically hit them hard enough to kill them. So that's what they did. They pistol whipped the guy in the back of the head. He didn't know they were there, and it was all caught on camera. They were all covered, and then they stole all of the drugs. They didn't care about the ambulance, but that's absolutely a thing that happens. And there are places where they purposefully don't put narcotics in any of the ambulances because of those reasons. They have to put a lot of control in them. And there are situations like this where there aren't even narcotics, but just because the organized criminals think there are narcotics there, they try and steal them. It's pretty effed. Storm has another story or a thought. This just happened the other day. So this Monday, I was coming home from the club around 2 in the morning, and I stopped for some McDonald's. I think that I was about to leave when this girl comes up and approaches me. She tells me some sob story about not having any transportation and asks me for a ride. Well, I just bought this car, and even if it's used, I love my girl. So I declined. She then asked me for money instead. Well, I was thinking, I haven't given to anyone less fortunate in a while. Okay, but I didn't have any cash. So I tell her, and she says, there's one right over there. Except I don't see a bank, and she was pointing in between 2 vehicles. I can't see very well. I say, nah, I'm going to the street to look for a gas station. I'll be back. She says, it'll be easier if you just drop me off. I say, no, you can wait in the McDonald's and I'll be back. Long story short, I get the money, come back, and she's gone. But she was across the street and runs back when she sees me. But she's not alone. There's a guy nearby who's on a cell phone. So I start staring daggers at this guy, and he doesn't enter the parking lot. I leave watching my rear view the whole ride home. Needless to say, I slept with a gun and magazine next to me the whole night. Still trying to figure out what that game was. I don't know if she was going to steal the car, or if she wanted to jack me, or what. Might have just wanted money. A lot of people will run across the street for money, and a lot of sketchy people who beg for money hang out with other sketchy people who beg for money. So, like, her being next to some guy with a cell phone isn't necessarily conclusive. But hey, we're talking about terror-inducing gut feeling stories, right? Aw, this is an epic one by Oglak. A few years ago, a few guy friends and I had a guys-only vacation from our girlfriends and wives in Florida. We went down to the Keys and camped, snorkeled, and went boating. All that touristy crap. After almost a week of doing all that, we got bored with the designated snorkeling areas and decided to find a less populated and more interesting area to snorkel. We ended up finding some saltwater marshes in a national park. Walked around the edges until we find a dilapidated and collapsing tower near the water. Maybe an old lifeguard tower. No swimming signs were everywhere. But being a bunch of drunk dudes, we decided to jump off the tower and into the water. No big deal. Jumped off a few times, swam around a bit. After a bit, everyone else was saying they wanted to stay in the marshes and swim around and explore. I just didn't have a good feeling about how murky the water was and how nobody else was around. Everyone else wanted to do it, and in a way, I did as well. But regardless, it was just a gut feeling. Eventually, after some arguing, I told them they could go ahead, but I was going to go back to the bar street to party. For whatever reason, they decided that was a better idea, and we all left. It was only a few days later that we were leaving the campsite that we ran across a ranger and had a conversation with him. Ended chatting about the marshes and how we jumped in a few times. All of a sudden, he got intense and his eyes got wide. It turns out those marshes were off limits because they were absolutely infested by saltwater crocodiles and, to a lesser extent, sharks. It was actually a tourist destination simply because they were so commonly seen there. If we swam around there and left shore, I don't know what would have happened. That water was so murky that you could scarcely see a foot in front of your face, and there were 11 of us. I don't know that any of us would have been seriously hurt or killed, but I wonder what would have happened. That also marks one of the few times that I didn't follow through with a sketchy plan, so I'm proud of it. Phew, yeah, guys, seriously, if you're in Florida, you don't go in water in Florida. In a lot of places in the South, you do not go in water, ever. Like, even in Disneyland, if you go in water, you could get eaten. You do not go in water in Florida unless it's a swimming pool. And even then, there might be a rogue alligator in it. So that's why you gotta see the whole pool. You gotta look. Me personally, I was raised in Africa, right? I lived in Lesotho. And I'll tell you what we were scared of. We weren't scared of lions. We weren't scared of tigers. We weren't scared of anything like that. We weren't scared of hyena. We were scared of hippo. The hippo. That was the thing that everyone's like, get the fuck away from hippo. Hippo will kill you. Hippo will kill you. Hippo will kill you. That's what it was like for me in Africa. So when I came over to the United States and all my friends were swimming in a fucking lake, I was like, hell no! And then all my cousins were like, why won't you get in the lake? And I was like, there could be hippo. And they were like, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, I don't want to die. And they were like, you think there's hippo here? Lars says, where I live in Australia, we have a campsite that's actually next to a crocodile-infested river. The river is 40 meters wide and shallow. I remember camping there with like 40 or 50 other people right on the shore for a few days. At night, you could shine a torch across it and see a couple dozen red eyes staring back at you on the other side. And of course, being kids, we went swimming and even went to the other side of the river. I also ran into a wasp nest that weekend as well. I was almost blowing 3 to 4 kids up by throwing a lighter into a fire. Thankfully, it didn't have enough force to do significant damage. I'm assuming the amount of people camping there was the reason why it even exists at all, as the crocs are probably more scared of being outnumbered 4 to 1, but yeah, I'm not sure why I'm alive, really. Next story is by HXC. Last summer, after I had gotten out of the shower and climbed into bed, I had this overwhelming feeling that I should deadbolt the door. So I got up and walked the length of my house, completely naked, and locked my side door. By the time I had gotten back to the bedroom and turned off the lights, somebody was there, trying to kick it in. I called 911 and had a 3-minute response time, but the guy got away by running into the field behind my house, and he disappeared. The police on the scene told me that they suspect it was the same guy that had broken into other areas and had assaulted and raped an elderly woman only a few days before. We bought a shotgun a few weeks later. The Scott 2K shares a story. One night near the end of my last semester at college, I had a rough draft due for a bullshit technical writing class. For some reason, I had serious writer's block, probably because the assignment was idiotic. I don't know why, but I got this sudden feeling of, forget it, it's not important, just sleep in tomorrow. I mean, I had feelings like that before, but never this strong, and I rarely gave in to them. I decided to go with it, stayed up long enough for the Sopranos torrent to show up, then went to bed after watching it. The next morning, the building I would normally cut through every Monday and Wednesday, after printing something in the library to get to the tech class, had a guy show up at about that time and kill 32 students. My desire to slack, watch television, and stay in my warm apartment steered me clear of the Virginia Tech shooting. Between that and the crazy situation with grades that happened afterwards, I carry a couple different kinds of guilt about it. Yeesh. The next story is by Rhino Cart. I was walking home by myself one night, years ago. Being the naive 15-year-old girl that I was at the time, I wasn't really worried about walking by myself so late at night. These two guys were walking down the road towards me. They were walking to each other and just walking. They didn't look at me, say anything that I heard, or make any kind of movement that would indicate that they were anything more than just two people on their way home. I got to the corner of my street, and they were just across the road, perhaps 15 feet away. My street only has a sidewalk on the one side, the side they were approaching on. Suddenly, I just got this awful sinking feeling in my stomach, and something told me to run. I didn't run, because I immediately reasoned I was being crazy. But I did turn immediately down the side of my street with no sidewalk, walking as quickly as I could. After a moment, I looked back at the two men. They had stopped at the corner and were perhaps 20 feet away from me now, and they were clearly having a quick and intense conversation. My heart was pounding at this point. I turned around and kept walking, fast. Looked back again. They had crossed the street and were following me. I live in a dead-end street. The only reason to be here is if you live here. So I started running. Lucky for me, I have long legs and have always been a good sprinter. Also, fortunately, my house was not very far down, and I was quickly in my driveway, pulling out my keys. I opened the door and was stepping into the house when I looked behind me again. They were standing at the end of my driveway. They looked at me, turned, and walked back the way they came. Perhaps reasoning that no teenager would live in a house by themselves, and obviously I had parents who would have heard me scream at this point. I still shudder to think what might have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut and turned early instead of walking within arm's reach of them. Maxam Musicus says, I was running down a mountain with my friend, trying to race him back to the campsite. I was almost finished winning the race and just had to climb over these waist-high barriers. Instead of stopping and just climbing over like I normally would have, I jumped as hard as I could, about 5 feet back from the barrier, and I barely made it over. When I looked up to brag about my victory, I noticed that my friend was standing almost completely still and slowly circling around the fence towards where the entrance was. Seeing the fear in his face, I looked down and realized that 2.5 feet in front of the fence was a very pissed off rattlesnake. Ooh, I wouldn't want to jump over a rattlesnake, especially having my legs stretched. Ooh, what if they bite your balls? I feel like you could probably survive getting bitten by a rattlesnake, but if a rattlesnake injects venom into your penis or your testicles, it probably doesn't bode well for your genitals. Next story is by ZTCZ Cali. When I was 8, I was playing in a sandbox in my backyard, and it had a lot of trees. It happened to be a pretty windy day. Not extremely windy, but it wasn't just a light breeze. Suddenly, while playing in the sandbox, I had this sudden urge to go get a Capri Sun. The thing was, I wasn't even thirsty. As soon as I walked back outside of the back door, I saw the biggest branch from a tree nearest to the sandbox fall exactly where I was sitting. I just thought to myself, ooh, my crazy urge to get a drink just saved my life. I'm gonna interject and add a story I have about a gut feeling that was very similar to this. So I used to run around with my friends and smoke weed in rainstorms when we were like 15 or 16. We loved doing that because it was just, it was cool to walk around in the rain and it's storming, no one else is outside, and you're smoking a joint, sharing stories about the good times with your buddies, right? It's fun. And at one point, we get to this part of the path, and we're on a path in a forest, right, in the woods. And there's all this water just rushing over it. And I stop to my left and I look. And I'm like, wow, this is really beautiful. This scene is just amazing. I'm gonna stop walking for a second and just admire it and appreciate it. And as you can probably guess, as soon as I stop, a fucking tree fell right in front of me, where I would have been if I hadn't stopped. And we decked it. That is the time in my life that I've ran faster than any other time, and so did my other two friends. We saw that thing happen, and we all just looked at me and at each other, and in that moment, we were like, holy shit, Jack almost got squashed by a tree. We're in a forest in a storm. Let's get the fuck out of here. And we ran away, and it was really fun. It was a great day. But I'm very, very glad that I chose to admire the view, because let me tell you, you might think, oh yeah, when a tree falls, it makes tons of noise, and you got time to dodge the tree. We did not. Like, it was just boom, and it wasn't like a whole tree fell. It was like there was a big tree, and the tree broke in half really high up in the air, and the half of the tree fell onto the sidewalk and blocked it. So it was like a 200-pound piece of thing falling from like 30 feet up in the air. So we were terrified, like really terrified. Listen to your gut feelings and smell the roses, because it might save your life. All right, now we're on to the next thread. Last thread, guys. This was by Lion versus Tuna. And the first story is an epic story by Maine Maria. Summary. I have a patient, and they came in with gas pain and ended up in the ICU for over a month. I listened to my gut, and the patient lived. Long version. I am a nurse, and there are a lot of gut feeling kind of stuff, but not much of it that sticks out. Unlike this one. This lady, she was a readmit from 3 days ago, had laparoscopic lung surgery, red flag. I get report and ask her about her labs, specifically lactate and procalcitonin. Oh, I'm sorry. Procalcitonin? Oh, some doctory thing. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it properly. We're just going to call it procalcitonin, which can indicate sepsis. So let me restart that sentence, I messed up. I get report and I ask her about her labs, specifically lactase and procalcitonin, because that can indicate sepsis. They never drew the report. Okay, weird. Anyway, they said that she's back because of uncontrolled pain. The doctor came in and told them that there is residual gas pain from the surgery. I get her to the floor and she is in a lot of pain. I listen to her stomach for any signs of movement. Her bowels should be moving, and I hear nothing, which is a red flag. I look at her stomach and see some redness around her surgical site, red flag. I mark the boundaries with marker. The doctor comes in and looks at her stomach and says that it's gas pain from surgery. He puts in some orders and leaves without even looking my way. A few hours later, around 5 a.m., I notice that she hasn't urinated, red flag. I ask if she has peed at all, and she said no and that she'll try. The tech gets her up to the commode and nothing. Then she starts tanking, blood pressure in the 70s. I call rapid response. I try to tell her everything that points out sepsis to me. She physically turns away from me to talk on the phone to the doctor. I asked her for labs and she ignores me. She got an order from a bolus of fluids saying that the patient is just dry and needs fluids. The fluids run through and she, rapid response, leaves, saying the BP is better. It's in the 80s now. I come back in the recheck and her BP is now in the 60s. I call rapid again and luckily I get a different nurse. The first one was at the end of her shift, so she left. She comes in and asks me what's going on. I tell her everything I'd noticed and she says that since the BP is unstable, to be stabilized the patient will be transferred to the ICU. I demand that labs need to be drawn. She agrees and the patient is transferred. The patient was septic. She was the most sick patient in the ICU for 4 weeks. The redness I'd marked into turned into full brown blisters. Full-blown blisters that covered her entire stomach. Her labs came back. Lactate was over 10. Less than 1 is normal. And procalcitonin was 34-ish. The patient lived. Always listen to your gut. Whew. Another epic post. This one by J3Z3B3L. I personally would like to thank you for listening to that intuition. Thank you for being a medical professional and listening to those innermost thoughts and intuition. My OBGYN saved my life by listening as you did. I had problems breastfeeding my previous daughters after they were born. There were four of them. I was able to provide them with that nutrition, but also had to deal with severe mastitis. My doctor informed me that there was a prescription that I could receive after the baby was born that would help my milk to not come in. I was excited to learn I wouldn't have to suffer from breastfeeding this time. Fast forward, I gave birth to my 5th daughter. Everything is great. My doctor explains that he doesn't think he should give me the medication to help stop my milk from coming in. I asked why, and he told me that it was just a feeling, and to forgive him for telling me that he would do it. The doctor and me decided to bind my breast to help with the milk coming in. Fast forward 3 days later, and I'm at home. I've been home for 2 days. I start having trouble breathing. I think it is because of the breast binding. It's too tight, so I loosen it. No relief. Nothing helped, and it got worse. I was having a horrible time with pain, tightness, and breathing. I couldn't lay down at all. I drive myself to urgent care with the new baby. Get seen within 3 minutes due to the fact that I was having a hard time breathing. They do the normal blood pressure and heart rate and weight, decide to do an EKG on me in the room. I'm waiting for results and about 4 minutes have passed. I see an ambulance pull into the back of the small building with lights and sirens, and I think, dang, someone got messed up. No sooner did I think that than the doctor comes back in and said my EKG showed that I was in heart failure and I would be going to the ambulance to go to the hospital. I arrived at the hospital and had admitted for the next 2 months. Found out I had postpartum cardiomyopathy, congestive heart failure. My heart was only functioning at 11% with 7 beats per minute, and a blood clot in my right lung. I've had many health issues since then, and I've been on disability due to those issues. My OBGYN was surprised to hear all that had happened, as he visited me in the hospital shortly afterwards. He told me that if he had given me the shot to stop the milk production, I would have died due to the high amount of blood clots that happened with that particular medicine, and that he was grateful that he listened to his intuition. They found out that I have a clotting disorder, which would have killed me if he had given me that shot. I am eternally grateful that my doctor listened to his intuition that day. It not being for my husband would have been a widower with 5 babies. Always listen to your intuition. Thanks again. Next story by Tinkerbecca. I'm a nurse's kid, and I had to take my cousin to the ER a few years ago. I picked him up from his dorm, and he was pretty out of it from what he thought was dehydration from the flu. But I noticed some small red splotches on his leg. He told me it was from his pant leg rubbing the skin, but something about it just looked off to me. When I got him to the hospital, I kept pointing it out during his exams. Yeah, he's dehydrated and has flu-like symptoms, but also, look at his leg. When the resident examined him and said he needed to have his attending take a look, I knew that it was serious. It turns out it was a severe cellulitis that was on its way to becoming septic. He ended up being admitted and stayed for 2 or 3 days. Who knows how long it would have taken the ER to find out if I hadn't pointed out the spots, or if I hadn't insisted on being in the triage and exam rooms with him. Always trust your gut. Next story is by JackRack1721. In high school, my girlfriend had me come to her youth group, and her youth pastor, who was also a music teacher at our high school, who was adored by the community, really didn't sit well with me. I saw him go from 100% praise singing to turning around to his wife and muttering something awful to her with the worst glare I'd ever seen, only she and I were in his line of sight, then go right back to fake smile singing. I told her he seemed really fake, and there was a dark side to him. It turns out he was really into kiddie porn, and even started buying alcohol for his pupils and inviting them to his house. The church knew about it, covered it up, and eventually he got arrested for misconduct with a minor. Did a quick jail stint, and then moved out of the state. Lloyd Sauce has an epic story to share. I've always been very paranoid about putting my son in daycare, but I decided to for his social growth. My brother had a friend whose wife was opening a daycare and had time slots available. So we went on with it. She seemed nice and such. The first day I picked him up, all was well. He was happy and said he had fun, but something she said rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't something bad or anything otherwise concerning, and I don't remember what she said. I just remember that it sat with me for some reason. He went the second day, and I picked him up. I still had this feeling, and started overanalyzing everything that she was saying. My brother's daughter was also in the same daycare, so my sister-in-law and I started talking to find out she felt the same way, and she didn't know why. The third day, my son freaked out about going, crying and throwing a fit, but his dad made him go. He told me when I picked him up about his reaction. Then the lady made a comment about the kids being great, but they were a bit loud and woke her daughter too early before school, and that can't be happening. My sister-in-law and I spoke again about it that day to find out that she'd been down-talking our kids to each other, aka making remarks about my son to her and her daughter to me. We pulled our kids out after the third day. My brother then found out that her husband said she shouldn't be doing a daycare as she's not really stable. Also, that she had her friends coming over while the children were there to hang out, and on occasion, leaving the children in the care of her friends while she ran to the store and the sort. We also found out that her 10 years experience in a daycare center was 10 years preparing food in the kitchen, not actually taking care of the children. Unfortunately, she still runs her daycare and no one uses her services seems to care about these particular details. Always trust your gut. Well, I guess that daycare person didn't turn out to be a serial killer, so that's nice. Riley Rules Sue shares another story. This happened to me when I was a kid. There was one lady who all the kids went to for daycare, and all she did was leave us, either out in the backyard or in the basement, for hours at a time. We used to be able to watch Power Rangers, but that got shut down, and we weren't allowed in the living room after somebody knocked over her end table. Also, any errands she had to run, she used to take us with her. All 8 or 10 of us had to squeeze into her van and follow her around Target or whatever. But eventually, that became too troublesome, and she would just leave us in the basement with her 14-year-old child watching us. This got her arrested, eventually. Somehow, none of our parents believed any of us when we said stuff like, "She took us to Target," or "The yoga mats we have to take an hour-long nap on are too small, and the concrete underneath in the basement hurts," or whatever. Probably because I lived in the epitome of upper-middle-class soccer mom land, and they just wanted an excuse to keep their kids busy so they could get blasted off wine and try and relive their glory days. Claude Cease shares another story about daycares. Not sure if there's any view from the child who went to the daycare, so here's one. I was sent to daycare between 7 and 9 years old because my family was too busy and everybody had to go to work. The daycare was inside a normal-looking house that simply had a sign outside that said something along the lines of daycare. I was there with my cousin, who was a year younger than me. Even then, we were much older than the other kids there, who were about toddlers. I think we were the only ones around the age. While the toddlers slept in a neater part in front of the house, I slept in the back, next to a noisy radiator on what felt like a hard bed. I don't think I even slept at all, but spent my time poking and staring at the radiator. The lady who ran the daycare used angry threats of things we were afraid of when I got upset and said that I wanted to leave. On the better side, she did give out snacks. Years later, when I was about 14, I heard from my parents about the lady getting arrested. She got very upset at a kid for being annoying. She forced the kid outside on a hot summer day, and he died. Now that I'm older, I'm questioning how the kid would have died. My guess was that he was wearing too many clothes or dehydrated. I'm never going to take that kind of risk like my family did. What's even sadder about this is the fact that so many people pay other people to spend their growing, developing years that they should be spending with their kid instead of the parents. That's brutal. My dad died when I was 12, but I can honestly tell you that in the 12 years my father was alive, he spent more quality time with me than most people I know get with their dad in their entire lives. So even though my dad's dead, he gave me a lifetime of positive one-on-one time. He made up for the fact that he's dead because he gave me a 10 years of childhood before he died. After that it got kind of intense. But my point's here, appreciate things, spend time with your kids. Really, you should be very hesitant to live a life where, you're not and you're paying other people to take care of them. Fear aside, if getting scared of them getting abducted is what makes you actually, take care of them yourself or not pay a babysitter or whatever, okay, that's probably not the best, but it's a good result because you spending more time with your child, they're not going to be a child forever. You're never going to get that time back. And you might regret it. So be careful, okay? Spend the time that you can. And if you don't have enough, find a way to get more. The next reply by Literacy is, my original approach to interacting, okay. Oh yeah, alright, just for some context, this story is a heated argument that I'm just including because it's so heated it was amusing. And I'm gonna try and get really into it. So let's get started. Alright. Well, my original approach to interacting with you was to start with the assumption that you were well-intentioned, but simply wrong. Maybe a little compassion will help nudge you closer to reason. Instead, this isn't made-up hipster parenting shit. It's basic empathy. Intellectually, you're alarmingly close already, but try to imagine you are a small child. Your brain craves stimulation, like you crave Mountain Dew and making America great again. Now, imagine mommy straps on your special helmet and puts you in a playpen and soft for 3 hours while she tries to remember why she just didn't have that abortion and save the world from the eventual Reddit shitposting adult that she has squeezed out of her rotten vagina. You'd think you might get a little upset. And the reply to that is, I don't know what rambling rant you went on, but I was able to gather from it that you're a whiny bitch of a soccer mom who isn't getting laid and who hates Trump and Republicans in general. That's cool. I'll make sure to vote for the Donald once again in 2020. People fight so dumbly. This story is by Undead Gorgeous. Yes, Undead Gorgeous. I told this story in the last gut feeling thread, but it's worth reposting. I was a birthday party princess in college. Dress up as a Disney character and sing some songs, help with cake, paint faces, typical party stuff. I get called to a party that began at 8 p.m. Unusual, but not unheard of in our industry. A lot of Spanish-speaking families party well into the night. But I pull up down the street, princesses don't drive, and begin walking to the house, dressed up as Sleeping Beauty, my party box of supplies in hand. But when I saw the house, I knew immediately something was wrong. There were no lights, no cars, no balloons. But against my better judgment, I knocked on the door. This super creepy looking guy in his mid-50s answers, in a dirty t-shirt and jeans. And the first thing he says is, "The party is around back." I took one look at this guy and booked it as fast as I could while holding a box, wearing a ball gown, and being mildly crippled to begin with. I got into my car, locked the doors, floored it to a 7-Eleven, and called my boss. The party never called, demanding to know where their princess was. No one asked for their deposit back. My boss called non-emergency police, but I don't know if anything was ever done. I'm 100% sure there was no party in that house. Next story is by The O-Face. It happened in the worst way. I was working with a patient whose cancer was in full remission. She looked amazing, and she was telling me about the trips she and her husband were planning. Paris, Africa, etc. All the places she couldn't go to because of kids, military, and now cancer. But now, with nothing holding her back, she was going to take the world by storm. It hit me. And it hit me hard. As we were setting up her follow-up appointments, she asked me if I was okay. I said it was just gas, and she laughed it off. 1 week later, she was dead. Her cancer had returned and in record time destroyed her to the point that she was bleeding out. They were going through so many bags of blood that they were told to stop. I will never forget the look on her face as she dreamt of the future that I knew would never happen, and the feeling it gave me. Yeah, that feeling right there. That's why you gotta live your life now. If you haven't seen death, if you haven't thought of your own death, if you haven't seen somebody die, that's the feeling you get. That's what happens. You ask yourself, you question, was it worth it? Did you do the right things? Did you play your cards right? So don't regret it. Go do whatever it is that makes you feel that way. If you think about this and you feel that moment and you feel scared that you aren't doing enough in your life to live your life, to make it your own life, to pursue your interests, then get on that, because you're going to die, and if you don't do it, nobody will. And you will die regretting the life you had. So don't do that. This is your one shot. Don't waste it. All right. Next story by Super Rabbit. I'm really sorry. I had a client that did something similar. She'd been our customer for as long as I can remember. She beat cancer, made it through, and was finally living her life. Well, she was going to. It was breast cancer, and she had had everything removed. So she goes in a little bit later to have breast implants. Came in the Friday before her surgery, really excited. Tells us all about how she's going to enjoy her new girls over the summer. I'll never forget how happy she looked to have beaten this disease and be getting a new body. Her husband came in 2 weeks later to get his hair cut. When I asked him how she was enjoying her new bikini-ready body, he just broke down and asked, "You didn't hear? She's dead." Turned out when they were wheeling her from surgery to post-op, somebody was not doing their job, and she aspirated on vomit from the anesthesia. My heart broke. I'll never forget how happy she was, and how one careless nurse or doctor not watching her for a little bit snuffed out a bright light that had survived cancer. Another story by Little Sad Eyes. I was just thinking this kind of thing. I've been pretty lucky in that my family is pretty long-lived, and I've never had to go through too many deaths. I picked up on that gut feeling when my parents moved to a farm and the cuddly, feral cat population in the barn was booming. I've always known that moment is the last time I'll see that creature. Lingering illness or hit by a car, doesn't matter. I only embraced that feeling a few years ago. My grandfather wasn't quite feeling up to par. I can't say I was ever super close to him. Most of my memories of him are as he sat perfectly still in his ratty recliner watching baseball, so I knew that he wasn't exactly somebody who volunteered to click his heels. That day I happened to stop by for a visit, yacked it up with Grandma, and walked past the living room on my way out, where he was doing nothing out of the ordinary. Old recliner, quietly meditating over baseball highlights. But that feeling came up, there and then, and it couldn't have been clearer than smacking my face into a stop sign. Say goodbye. Now. I did. I met his eyes, and I brought as much compassion as I could into my smile, and I said my most ordinary goodbye ever. A week later, he took a 2-day nosedive from not feeling well straight into, it wasn't due to anything as dramatic or singular as a heart attack or cancer, and falls solidly into died of old age. Well, that's one way to go. Next story is by Zulu Mulu Karabunu. Long story short, Dad nearly kidnapped by fake customs officers. When he was a young adult, my dad went to Madrid to stay with a friend. There was a sudden change, and they couldn't pick him up from the train station. He had to sleep rough in the station after being mistaken for a prostitute twice. 2 customs officers showed up and started showing my dad their badges and telling him to go with them. Already unsure because they weren't in uniform, my dad followed them anyway. They were putting his stuff in the back of an unmarked car, and beckoning him to get in, all the time reassuring him and showing their badges, when he saw a police officer walking down the side of the road. Feeling that something was really, really wrong, he went up to the police officer and asked him to help get his stuff out of the car. The police officer went over to the two men, got the stuff out of the car, and talked to them, and got them to show him their papers. It turns out they were fakes. And the officer took Dad back to the police station after arresting the two men, and allowed him to stay the night there. Dad got back with his friends, and we all lived happily ever after. Alright everybody! That's it for the epic gut feeling video. If you want more content like this, please drop a like, a comment, or subscribe, or watch another video. You got 4 options to support us here. And if you want to make content like this using some of these handy dandy tools that I show you, you can parse through Reddit comments, pick your favorite threads, and just automatically